why don't we kick things off? Maybe a little intro, where you went to school, maybe some of your first couple jobs, and we'll go from there.
Sure, sure. So I studied at the Art Institute and actually majored in hospitality management, which is something that very early on in my professional career, I kind of saw myself getting involved in. And then, as life typically tends to do for so many of us, it pulled me in an entirely different direction, which, now in hindsight, I can look back on, and I'm actually very appreciative of the fact, that it did take me in a different direction, given the different industries that I was able to be exposed to over the years, from the legal sector to investor and public relations, business development, and then, most recently, the cannabis space. So no question about it, I'm happy of the path that, I ended up going down. But, as far as my professional, experience, is concerned, it really is deeply rooted in the operational side of running a company. So a lot of, what goes on behind the scenes, everything from accounting and finance to compliance, human resources, branding and marketing, that's all kind of been my forte over the last several years. In the last several years too, I've actually been able to, really get some really good exposure and experience within the public sectors. A lot of that coming from, co-owning and co-founding an investor and public relations company alongside my predecessor here, the distinguished Miss Vanessa Luna. Her and I both co-owned an investor and public relations company several years ago, and that was kind of my first, foray into, the public market space. We worked with a lot of companies that were in, I guess you could consider, new and emerging industries. And, they were companies typically on the OTC, but had aspirations of wanting to, be uplisted at some point to the NASDAQ. And so we would come in and, what my focus really was on, was helping them kind of create, an identity for themselves and create, a message. I mean, I'm sure, as you know, Jason, a big part of public and investor relations surrounds, being able to, create a very effective message that you're going to broadcast out there. And, not only something that's going to be appealing to your existing base of, shareholders and investors, but obviously you want to attract, new eyeballs to the company. So that was really what I did. I really, collaborated and worked with the leaders of those companies and really helped them kind of, put together a message that, we were going to put out there and, really just get them off and running. And that's actually how I ended up being introduced to Global back in 2017, when I came on board as a business development consultant. And, it was at a time really when the company was looking to restructure itself entirely, internally and, in order to better and more effectively position it to go after some of the markets that it had targeted. So that was, really, when I came in and really started to get involved with, what they were doing up until, June of 2018, when myself alongside, Miss Luna, we took over as executive officers of the company when the prior executives retired. I took over as COO and interim CFO and really played a pretty significant role in helping kind of, restructure the company internally and getting it through a 2-year audit, which, was probably the most daunting and challenging task of my professional career to date, at least. But nonetheless, it helped create a level of transparency for the company that, we wanted to really give our shareholders. And so it was a really huge accomplishment, a nice little feather, in my professional cap, so to speak. Remained in that position up through January of this year when I resigned and stepped down, really felt it was time for me to go out and kind of, tackle some, ventures on my own. But as we all kind of experienced here this year, we got thrown a pretty wicked curveball with, COVID-19, the pandemic, and that kind of bringing a lot of, aspects of our economy to a grinding halt. So definitely threw a wrench in my plans, but throughout that time, I was fortunate enough to remain in close contact with Vanessa and with the company. And that was kind of the genesis of where, the first conversations were started to be had between her and I about the potential of me jumping back into the company, but this time, in the role of CEO, just given my own personal passion for the psychedelic space, which we'll get into more. But that kind of brings us to, where we are today. I know kind of a long, road there, but that's where we are here today, where, I've jumped in here as CEO of Global, and I'm very excited and fortunate and really ready to lead the charge here for the company into this exciting space.
Yeah, and maybe one link that I would love you to touch on So before we get into psychedelics, so you go from running a IR PR company, but then you get involved with global. What made you get involved with global? Obviously, they were in the cannabis space, or at least that was the understanding. You want to maybe walk people through why you made the jump to go from, doing your own thing to joining a company?
Sure. So, I mean, I've always had, a passion, in new and emerging industries. And so, whenever I've looked at, some of the companies that I've worked with prior to, kind of coming on board, I've always, looked to see what segment of, the business sector that they were looking to kind of get involved in. And if it was something that I felt passionate about, then more times than not, that kind of led me to want to get involved. And that was sort of the case there with global. When I first became involved, they kind of had an idea. They had been in the prepayment card and payment processing sector for a number of years, and it was at a time kind of when cannabis was really sort of really taking off, and they wanted to find a way to kind of get involved in that industry. They didn't know, how, or what specific area, but they knew that they wanted to be involved. And that's really where, I came in, and why, I decided to come in, because I saw the cannabis space as something that, I was obviously very excited about and really saw the potential there. And it made sense, to come in and be a part of helping position that company and get it to, where it wanted to go in terms of the cannabis space.
Well, so it makes sense. And I guess now that, we'll hop into, kind of the psychedelic side of it. So obviously you you join Global when they're doing cannabis. What makes you go, hey, psychedelics is kind of coming up. This is something I maybe have more passion about, than cannabis. What was the thought process there? What made you want to take that kind of jump?
Right. So, I mean, for me, the medicinal psychedelic space is something that actually is, rather, a personal passion of mine, and it's something that, I'm happy to share, with you and everyone. The fact that, I lost my father 2 years ago, as a matter of fact, this month, after a long and very, very difficult battle with depression, which led to, opioid and alcohol dependency. And it really contributed to the decline of his health, where, he passed away at a very, relatively young age of 59 years old. And, it wasn't until after his passing that, when I was becoming more involved in the cannabis space and started to become more aware of, some of these alternative, medicines and treatments that, are out there, and eventually becoming introduced to, the psychedelic space, that I really started to, question and wonder, had these treatments, particularly in the psychedelic side, with psilocybin therapy and treatment, where I had really read about, a lot of other people that had suffered through the same things that my father did, and, reading about their story and how, psychedelic related treatments not only changed their lives, but in many aspects saved it. And it really did get me wondering, had my father been introduced to these, alternative therapies and treatments years ago, could it have perhaps changed the course of his life, And of course, that's a question I'll never be able to answer, but I think the thing that it kind of ignited within me is, why are we not looking at medicinal psychedelics, in a more favorable light? Why is it something that's still to this day kind of hidden in the shadows? Especially given the fact that even in just the limited research and clinical trials that have been done, surrounding medicinal psychedelics, there's enough positive data and information to really suggest that they have, and they could potentially hold the key to being able to unlock, certain parts of our brain and our consciousness that other conventional drugs that have been used to treat things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, even social anxiety within adults suffering with autism, that where those conventional drugs sort of fall short and are unable to really tap into certain areas of the brain, we're seeing psychedelics, be able to do that and be able to tackle the root of the problem and really treat it, not just manage it, but treat it. And that, to me, is where this has kind of become more of a personal passion. I obviously see, the upside in what is happening with the industry itself, but, being able to, take the personal passion that I have for it and now kind of merge it with, this excitement that I have from the business perspective, I think it's created a very unique opportunity for myself, and, what I'm hoping to be able to accomplish here, with Global Trac over the next several months.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of great points, and thanks for that story. Obviously, a pretty emotional story, but thanks for that. And it seems like, hey, now's the time. Obviously, the market's getting hot for psychedelics. Now's the perfect time where you can use your past experiences, what you've seen, and try and do better for other people that are suffering from the same thing. Like you said,
Absolutely.
there's already been a lot of clinicals done about addiction relief, depression, PTSD, things like that, and it seems like there's overwhelming success. So I guess let's go into the next step. Maybe a little bit about Global Track. We'll do another video in more depth, but so what's your vision? So you join, maybe we can cover. Obviously, you just take the reins back. You already mentioned
Mhm.
it. So you're back in control. What's your vision for the company? Obviously, we did do a video with Vanessa talking about the website you guys created. But did you want to touch on, maybe what your long-term vision is for the company, or where you hope things go? How do you think you're going to fit in with?
Sure. So, I mean, as the baton, so to speak, has been handed over to me here, obviously Vanessa has done a really good job of setting the wheels in motion for the company and getting it going here, within the medicinal psychedelic space, following its pivot from, moving from the cannabis space to here in psychedelics. And, you touched on the website, which, what my vision really is here for the company is to create a significant platform for the medicinal psychedelic space. And part of that does obviously involve our Psychedelic Spotlight website. But what I am trying to, and what we're trying to accomplish here is really creating a platform for everyone that is involved in this industry and everyone that, is interested in getting involved in it. So we're talking about, scientists, doctors, investors, philanthropists, absolutely anyone and everyone that is looking for a place where they can come to educate themselves. I think that's very important, being able to have access to, what are psychedelics? What is psilocybin therapy? Why is it something that, we should even be, paying attention to? And creating a platform where everyone can kind of, collaborate, and kind of discuss what is going on here in this industry. And again, whether it's on the investment side of things, whether you've got an investor, that is looking at this industry and is interested in it, but, doesn't know quite enough about it to really, make that decision. We want them to come here and we want them to obviously be able to explore and find everything out that they can about the industry itself so that they can make the most educated decision that makes, the most sense for them. And that really, more than anything else, is what we are looking to do. We want to be advocates, for the reform movement that we really are starting to see pick up serious momentum, not just here, in the United States, but really across the globe right now. You're starting to see psychedelics, become more of a topic of, discussion, and for good reason. And so again, we just want to be part of that push to help get psychedelics out of the shadows and put them in a far more favorable light so that we can really start to dive more into them. I think that's the other thing that we got to understand is we've only barely scratched the surface so far of really understanding, the benefits that medicinal psychedelics have to offer. And, again, being an advocate and, getting it out into the light, I think, is a big part of what we're looking to accomplish here, at Global Track.
Yeah, and we can dive into, maybe the next video will be great to go into some of the use cases. A lot of people, when they think about mushrooms, they just, think about magic mushrooms that they do in their backyard or whatever. And it
Right.
would be interesting to talk about some of the other use cases in more detail. I think a big part about any emerging space, kind of the learning curve. You got to teach people, what it's about. It's not just, hey, you want to do some mushrooms. There is obviously a bigger picture here.